375 million years ago, Earth experienced a catastrophe so devastating that 90% of all marine species vanished in the geological blink of an eye. Ancient armored fish, massive coral reefs, and countless creatures disappeared forever as the planet's oceans turned into oxygen-depleted graveyards. What mysterious force could have transformed Earth's thriving seas into underwater wastelands? And could the same silent killer be awakening in our oceans today? 375 million years ago, our planet was a very different world. The continents we know today were pushed together in strange shapes, and the air felt thick and warm. Most of the land was bare rock or low plants, with no flowers, grass, or trees that would look familiar to us. But under the water, that's where life was having a party. Imagine swimming in those ancient seas. You would see huge coral reefs stretching like underwater cities as far as your eyes could see. These weren't built by the corals we know today, but by strange creatures called stromatoporoids that made massive wave-resistant structures. Fish unlike any you've seen before glided through these waters. Some wore armor plates that shined in the dappled sunlight, their bodies protected by bone shields that made them look like swimming tanks. The rulers of these waters were the placoderms, fierce hunters with strong jaw plates that could crush shells with ease. Their eyes tracked movement with cold precision as they patrolled their underwater domains. Below, on the seafloor, trilobites, ancient relatives of crabs and insects, scuttled along with their many legs, their compound eyes scanning for bits of food or signs of danger. This world teemed with life. The water vibrated with the sounds of countless creatures moving, feeding, and living. The diversity was stunning. Scientists believe there were thousands of different species just in these ancient coral communities alone. Life had been flourishing this way for millions of years, evolving and diversifying through time. But hidden in this vibrant world were the first quiet signs of trouble. In some areas, the clear waters were beginning to cloud. Plants on land, still simple compared to what we know today, were sending their roots deeper into the ground. As they broke down rocks, they released nutrients that washed into the seas. These nutrients fed tiny algae that multiplied quickly, turning patches of water green. When these algae died, they sank to the bottom and rotted, a process that stole oxygen from the water. Fish swimming into these zones would suddenly find themselves gasping, their gills unable to extract enough oxygen to survive. At first, these dead zones were small and scattered, but they were a warning of what was coming. No creature swimming through those ancient seas could have known it. But the planet was beginning to change in ways that would soon become catastrophic. Earth's climate was starting to swing between extremes. The movement of continents was altering ocean currents, and the very plants that were beginning to green the land were unwittingly changing the chemistry of the oceans. Within just a few million years, barely a moment in Earth's long history, nearly 9 out of every 10 species living in these vibrant seas would vanish forever. Their fossilized remains would become the only evidence that they ever existed. The late Devonian extinction was beginning, a crisis that would reshape life on Earth and echo through time as one of the 5 greatest mass extinctions our planet has ever witnessed. To understand what happened next, we need to look at both the land and sea during this time. The world was changing in ways that seemed small at first, but would soon add up to big trouble. On land, plants were getting their first real foothold. Before this time, most of Earth's land was bare rock, with maybe some moss-like plants hugging the ground. But now, plants were growing taller, developing real roots, stems, and leaves. Some of the first forests were starting to spread, though they looked nothing like our forests today. Imagine strange fern-like trees and club mosses that grew as tall as houses, their strange shapes making the landscape look alien. As these plants grew, their roots dug into the rocks, breaking them down into the very first soils on Earth. This might sound like a good thing, but it released tons of nutrients that washed into the oceans when it rained. It was like someone was dumping too much plant food into a fish tank. The oceans began to get cloudy in more places. In the shallow waters, some fish were developing stronger fins that could help them push up on land for short trips. They weren't walking on land yet, but they were getting closer. These fish had lungs as well as gills, letting them gulp air when the water got bad. They would need this ability more and more as time went on. The trouble started slowly but picked up speed. Those nutrients washing into the oceans fed tiny algae, which grew in huge blooms that turned the water green in many coastal areas. When these countless tiny plants died, they sank to the bottom. Bacteria that ate the dead algae used up oxygen in the water. The more algae died, the more oxygen disappeared. Fish swimming into these areas would suddenly feel like they couldn't breathe. Their gills pumped faster and faster, trying to pull oxygen from water that had less and less to give. Many would try to swim away to clearer waters, but some couldn't escape in time. They would float, mouths open, bodies twitching before going still. The dead fish would sink to join the rotting algae, making the problem even worse. At the same time, Earth's climate was swinging wildly. Sometimes it was much warmer than before, with higher sea levels that drowned coastal habitats. Other times it grew colder, with ice forming near the poles and sea levels dropping, leaving some sea creatures stranded. These changes happened too quickly for many species to adapt. The great continent in the south, which scientists call Gondwana, was slowly drifting toward the South Pole. As it moved, the weathering of its rocks pulled more carbon dioxide from the air. This important gas helps keep Earth warm, so with less of it, the planet cooled even more during the cold swings. For the creatures of the ancient oceans, it must have felt like their world was going crazy. The waters they had lived in for countless generations were becoming unrecognizable. Reef homes that had stood for millions of years began to die. The clear waters grew murky. And with each passing 1,000 years, more and more species found themselves fighting a losing battle just to breathe in their own homes. As the crisis deepened, the first places to feel the full force of the disaster were the reef communities. These underwater cities had taken millions of years to build, growing bit by bit as countless tiny creatures added their hard skeletons to the structure. Now, in the span of just a few thousand years, faster than you can snap your fingers in Earth time, these massive reefs began to die. The clear waters around the reefs grew cloudy and green, then dark and stagnant. The stromatoporoids, which had built most of these reefs, couldn't survive in water with such low oxygen. They began to die off, their rock-like bodies becoming tombstones rather than living homes. Fish that relied on the reefs for food and protection found themselves without shelter, exposed to predators and struggling to find enough to eat. The armored fish, which had ruled the oceans for so long, were hit especially hard. These placoderms, with their heavy bone shields and strong jaws, needed lots of oxygen to power their active hunting. As oxygen levels dropped in more and more parts of the ocean, they struggled to breathe. Their movements slowed. Their mighty jaws opened and closed weakly as they tried to pull more water through their gills. Species that had been the top predators for tens of millions of years now found themselves dying out, family by family, genus by genus. The trilobites, those ancient relatives of crabs that had scuttled across the seafloor since before even the fish appeared, were also in trouble. They had survived earlier mass extinctions, adapting and evolving through millions of years of Earth's changes. But now many families of trilobites disappeared from the fossil record, like pages ripped from the book of life. The extinction didn't happen all at once. Instead, it came in pulses, like waves hitting a shore. Each wave of death would sweep away more species, followed by a brief time when things seemed to stabilize. Then another wave would come, even worse than before, taking away creatures that had somehow survived the earlier disaster. Scientists have found evidence for at least 7 major extinction pulses during this time, each one wiping out more life from the struggling seas. On land, changes continued that may have made things worse for ocean life. The first true forests appeared, with trees growing up to 30 meters tall, as high as an 8-story building. These weren't like our modern forests. There were no flowers, no fruits, no birds singing in the branches. Instead, these forests were filled with strange fern-like trees and giant relatives of today's club mosses and horsetails. Their deep roots broke down rocks even faster, sending more nutrients washing into the struggling seas. Each time the climate swung between warm and cold, sea levels rose and fell. Shallow habitats where many creatures lived would be flooded, then left high and dry, then flooded again. Each swing was like a hammer blow to species already struggling to survive the changing ocean chemistry. As time went on, the waves of extinction came faster and hit harder. Species that had weathered the earlier crises finally disappeared. Entire families of creatures vanished without leaving any descendants. The rich tapestry of ocean life, which had taken hundreds of millions of years to weave, was being torn apart thread by thread, leaving only tatters of what had once been a masterpiece of evolution. When the late Devonian extinction finally ended, the oceans had changed forever. The great reef systems that had dominated marine environments for over 100 million years were gone. If you could have swum in these seas before and after the extinction, you would hardly recognize them as the same planet. Where once there had been underwater cities teeming with thousands of species, now there were empty spaces, like ghost towns after everyone has moved away. The few creatures that survived had special traits that helped them live through the bad times. Some could breathe air as well as use gills. Others needed less food to survive. Many could live in a wide range of conditions, not just in one special place. These survivors began the slow work of filling the empty oceans again, evolving into new forms to take advantage of habitats that were now free of competition. Among the rare fish groups that made it through were the ancestors of almost all fish alive today. The heavy armor that had once protected the placoderms had become a weakness in low-oxygen waters, requiring too much energy to carry around. The fish that survived often had lighter bodies that needed less oxygen to move. Their descendants would eventually fill the seas with new kinds of fish, the ray-finned fish that make up most of the fish we know today. Even more important for our own story, one group of survivors included fish whose fins were evolving into limbs. These fish could prop themselves up in shallow water and even make short trips onto land. Had they been wiped out in the extinction, the whole history of land animals might have been different. There might never have been any amphibians, reptiles, dinosaurs, birds, or mammals, including us. It took millions of years for life in the oceans to recover its diversity. New reef communities eventually formed, but they were built by different creatures. New species evolved to fill the roles of those that had been lost. But the oceans were never quite the same again. It was as if nature had tried one experiment, it had failed, and now it was trying a different approach. Today, as we look at our own changing planet, the story of the late Devonian extinction offers both warning and hope. The warning is clear. When we change Earth's systems too quickly, the results can be devastating. Right now, nutrients from farms and cities are washing into our oceans, creating dead zones, where oxygen levels drop too low for fish to survive. Our climate is changing faster than at almost any time in Earth's history. The oceans are warming and becoming more acidic, yet the story also offers hope. Life survived one of the worst crises in Earth's history. It changed, adapted, and continued. The planet healed itself, though it took millions of years to do so. And from the survivors of that ancient crisis came the ancestors of all the animals that would eventually populate both sea and land, including, after hundreds of millions of years of evolution, us. When you look at a fish swimming in water today, you're seeing the distant relative of a survivor, one of the few that made it through when Earth lost almost everything. In its cells, it carries the legacy of that ancient victory over disaster, a living reminder that life finds a way forward, even through the darkest of times.